Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well today. This is or will probably be a quick stream in relative terms. It involving my reactions to the latest audio that's been released of Chris Watts, the man who killed his entire family in Colorado in August of last year, who in mid-February gave a follow-up interview to at least two of the people who had interviewed him when he eventually confessed, and a third person who I'm not directly familiar with. A link to the full audio is in the description below. And thanks to Plunder Media for putting that out there for everyone to hear. There's something I want to predicate this stream with that seemed to be misunderstood by some people from my previous stream regarding this case. I just want it to be understood that my fascination with this case and things like it does not equate to glorification of the events and the actions taken within those cases. My condolences, if they need to be expressly stated, go out to the family of Shanann Watts, or Shanann Ruzick, her maiden name, and to Chris Watts's family, who has to deal with the aftermath of this, And for whatever it's worth, may she, Shanann, and her children rest in peace. This is not something to be happy about. But at the same time, just like with so much other true crime and things in the world, I cannot deny my morbid fascination, thus the title of the stream. Before I get into it, I want to say hello to the people who have showed up to listen to me babble for a few minutes. RVADAR, or Rivadar, or however you want to say that, was the first person to comment in the chat. So he or she has won the first prize. Hello, Mule1066. Hello, Point Curation. Hello, The Original Shroom. MCRN Doniger. Hello. Dream Wanderer Soul 1. Hello. Backscan. Hello. Chadwick Dupree. Hello. Necrosol. Hello. Okay, so I'm not going to go point by point through the entire audio. I've listened to 80% of it. I got kind of sick of listening to him after we get to the second segment. What happens is that the investigators, the two that you see in the confession video, Tammy Lee, who ran the polygraph, and Graham Coder, both special agents in, I believe, the CBI and or FBI. I forget exactly which. They are present at the interview, in addition to a third man who I assume had something to do with the investigation, but I don't know who it is offhand. They interviewed Chris Watts the middle of February and asked a bunch of follow-up questions to clarify the events of the night of the murders, his specific actions therein, trying to get an idea of his mindset, his motivations, what he did, etc. Now, if you listen to the audio, they are very friendly. The interviewers, I mean, they're very friendly. They're relatively jovial. They're sort of casual about things. They're trying to elicit from him trust. They're trying to elicit from him the ability to be open with them, treating him like a normal person. I don't hold it against them for using the tactic of camaraderie to try to elicit from him more information. Because I certainly would not categorize him as someone I would treat with respect or friendliness or anything else. So for their part in trying to interview and trying to get more information out of him, I give them a pass, obviously, because they're doing their jobs. And they did get a lot of more information out of him. The problem is that a lot of the information they got out of him has only one witness, and that is Chris Watts. And as we've already seen, he is not a reliable witness. Now, as I say, I'm not going to go through everything that was said, but I will give you my impressions of what I heard. And if you'd like to listen to it yourself, again, links in the description. Hello, Frosted Glass, Twisted Skipster, Chicago Mike, Beth Kesselman, Cynical Lindsay, and Random American. Hello. All right. So if you've been following this case, like so many other people have, myself included, you know a lot of the details. If you don't know a lot of the details, well, I'm not going to give you a full summary here, but this is my impression. Chris Watts is still a liar. Still a liar. He gave out a lot of information and a lot of details that, if true, almost make his crimes more horrific. Let me give you an example. And I predicate all of this by saying, if you believe Chris Watts now, the very high level chain of events were his wife came home from a business trip. She went to bed. At some point during, shortly after her arriving home, she and he had sex. Then they went back to sleep. He got up, did a workout or something. And again, I also want to clarify, some of how he relayed the chain of events is a little murky. So if I'm getting it a bit off from what he relayed in the audio or corrected himself, that's just the nature of the beast. And also I should say that a lot of my comments in the first video on this subject were made prior to seeing a lot more information that had come out either just before or just after I did that stream. So some of my conclusions and some of my statements on such have since been either corrected or nullified, depending. So if you go back and listen to that other stream, just forewarning. Anyway, they have sex. They go back to bed. He wakes up at his usual time to get ready for work. He goes and does his workout, I guess, downstairs, and then goes back upstairs to have a conversation with his wife about separating, about how he doesn't love her anymore. And then at some point during that conversation, or after that conversation, that becomes heated, he strangles her. While he's in the process of strangling her, or just after she is dead, one of the two, his oldest daughter, Bella, walks into the room, presumably having heard the noise, and asking what's wrong with Mommy. He tells Bella that Mommy is sick and that he's going to have to take her to the doctor or the hospital or something. He then goes outside, gets into his truck, backs his truck up into the garage partway, and just slightly outside the range of the camera that is on his neighbor's house. And according to this version of the story, he loads his wife's body into the back seat of the truck and then takes his two daughters, still alive, into the truck as well and sits them back there with their mother's dead body on the floor in the back seat of the truck. He then proceeds to drive all three of them and himself off to a work site that he was planned to be working on later that day. He, depending on how I heard him relay the tale, he took the wife's body, Shanann's body, buried her, or at least prepped her for burial. I'm not quite sure which. Then went back to the car and in succession smothered his youngest daughter, Celeste, and then his older daughter, Bella, in the car. He then proceeded to, depending on, again, the chain of events, bury his wife in a shallow grave. Or prior to that, not quite sure which, he then carried the bodies of his two daughters up to two different giant oil tanks and shoved them through 8-inch in diameter holes or access ports at the top of these tanks after climbing a long flight of stairs for each, so that they would drop into the oil water mixture below and then close those tanks up. Buried his wife, and then went about doing his job for the day, to the point where his coworkers, when they finally arrived later in the morning, didn't notice anything out of place. He acted completely normally. He acted as he always did. There was no indication that anything was wrong. Over the course of the day, Shanann's good friend, Nicole Atkinson, who had been aware that Shanann had a doctor's appointment later that day, became worried when she didn't hear from Shanann. And Shanann was very, very active on social media, so the absence of any morning tweets or Facebook posts also caused her alarm. She went through an odyssey of trying to find out what was wrong with Shanann, where she was she at home, was she somewhere else, before finally calling the cops. And once the police arrived at the house, shortly thereafter, well, several minutes thereafter, let's say, Chris Watts arrived on the scene. Now, all of this has been recorded in some fashion from that point on through police body cam video. This is probably one of the most well-documented and timeline detailed murder cases I think I've ever seen. Thanks in part, well, not in part, but in majority to our modern era of not only text communications and logs, but also police body cam footage, etc. So, what about this interview with Chris Watts, this follow-up interview, causes me to be actually kind of angry right now? I'm talking on top of the natural infuriation of just eliminating your family, smothering your toddler children to death, killing your pregnant wife, hiding their bodies. I mean, what more could that be? Through the course of this second interview, and especially when talking about the details of the night in question, Chris Watts, while admitting things that are not, let's say, complementary to his image, as in taking his living children in the truck with him to the site of their eventual disposal while they were alive in the back seat with their dead mother, there's something that he doesn't do despite all of this. And that is take responsibility for his actions. Now, what could you mean by that, Scribe? You ask. I mean, he pled guilty. He admitted killing his wife, admitted killing his children. Well, that's because Chris Watts is an idiot. He committed horrific crimes. And I talked about just exactly how horrific and in what order and in what level those were in the first stream. He can't go back on the fact that he did those things. However, if you listen to the latest audio, he tries still to mitigate his premeditation. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, killing your children, pretty bad. I mean, that's an understatement. Killing your pregnant wife, 15 weeks pregnant wife, pretty bad. Eliminating your entire family, short of your own parents, etc. Yeah, that's up there. But he would have you believe by this interview that this was some kind of act of impulse, that this was some kind of, I don't know, crime of passion in retrospect, that this was not premeditated, that he had not planned this, except for all of the evidence prior to the killings, excuse me, and his behavior after the killings that would belie that notion. And yet, even now, he tries to put a spin on this where he's not a complete monster. Oh, he's still a monster, but he wasn't a premeditated monster. Okay. Now, how do we know this, or how can we suspect this? I should say. I don't want to speak in absolutes here. These are my impressions from the information that's come out since, and my impressions of listening to not only this interview, but his confession interview, his polygraph, and most especially his words and behavior the day he arrived at the house with the police there, and as well as his news interviews. The problem is that if you are to believe that Chris Watts did this unplanned and impulsively, you would have to believe that he took no preparations before and took no preparations after the fact to conceal his crime. Now, the before is the important part insofar as premeditation. What do we know, or what has been shown so far, that would indicate that this was premeditated? Well, first and foremost, it was the site of the dumping of the bodies, otherwise known as Survey 319. This was a site that Chris Watts volunteered to go out to, even though, from what I understand, he wasn't needed to, or he hadn't been signed up to, but he volunteered to go out there early when he knew no one would be around. And he sent these messages to his coworker or his supervisor, I forget which, at least a day or so prior to the murders. Yeah. And add to that the fact that he backed the truck up into the garage very carefully, past the line of sight of the camera of his neighbor who would have caught him carrying out the body of his wife and or carrying out the bodies of his children or walking them out. I'm still not sure that he didn't kill the kids in the house. I'm trying to imagine the logistics of having two conscious, lively children worried about their mother sitting in the back of a truck for the hour some odd drive from his house to the work site, not causing him some difficulty in real life. Now, I'm not quite sure what the benefit to his image would be in saying that the children were alive all the way up to the point of getting to the work site, if that was his intent versus him just killing them in the house. I suppose if he killed them in the house, it might appear more like it was premeditated than if it was something where he was not acting rationally, quote unquote, by taking them with him alive to the work site. None of it looks good, let's say. So I'm not quite sure about that part. I'm still not sure the kids were alive when he drove out of that driveway. I've seen some people with conspiracy theories showing or believing to show that the videotape taken by the neighbor's camera has evidence of there being other footsteps or maybe another figure walking along with him. So if that part is true, okay, still horrific. But as he describes the events that took place that night, they don't make any sense. At one point, he talks about how when he decided to have this conversation with his wife, this is after she got home, after they had sex, after they went back to sleep, after he got up and did his workout or whatever, that the conversation he had with his wife regarding their future, regarding his lack of love for her or whatever, and that they needed to sell the house, he says very explicitly in this video, and the detectives or the interviewers ask several times for clarification, because he says he was straddling her body at the time he was having this conversation. Like he was on top of her, knees on either side of her torso, looking down at her in the bed, having this conversation. Because that's how you have really important conversations with your spouse about your relationship. And that this conversation lasted somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. So for 10 or 15 minutes, a grown man is straddling his 15-week pregnant wife's body and having an important conversation about their relationship, such that it is emotional, it's a breakup, it's a you're cheating on me kind of conversation. That is the logistics of this conversation, so says Chris Watts. Also, that during the course of his strangling her, which he describes as, he doesn't really understand how much time passed or how much pressure he exerted and all this other stuff, she never fought back. Because they ask him several times, she didn't fight back? Because Chris Watts had no noticeable injuries, no scratches on his face or his neck, like any struggle from his wife. Which makes absolutely no sense. Human instinct alone would cause her to fight back, not just lay there prone and allow him to strangle her. Now, my theory has always been that he ambushed her, that he pinned her down and or wrapped her in the blanket that she was eventually buried with to restrain her arms and keep her from being able to fight back while he strangled her to death. That's always been my theory, that he wrapped her up like a burrito in a blanket ahead of time. Now, Bella walking in on the situation could have happened. I mean, it seems like such an odd Again, it seems like it's an odd thing to admit. I took my living children with me with their dead mother in the back seat to the site where I eventually disposed of them. And after dumping their mother out of the car, then I smothered them both to death. That seems so inhumanly horrific. I have a hard time thinking he's lying about that. Although, like I say, the logistics of that, having two, I got to be imagining crying children, because if you listen to the other interviews, these kids were completely dependent on their mother. Okay. If their mother was out of their sight for more than 10 minutes, they were asking about her, wanting her back, screaming for her presence if she was outside of their realm of contact for any period of time. So the idea that their quote unquote sick mother lying on the floorboards of the car, not moving, not speaking, not responding, would not have had these kids hysterical the entire duration of the trip to the dump site. I don't see how that works. I don't see how the logistics of that operate if he hadn't already killed the children in the house. The chain of events that I imagine is that he killed Shanann and then smothered the two kids and then carried them out. Because if you watch the video of him getting the truck all prepped, he walks back and forth to the truck about 3 or 4 times. And, you know, he leads the one kid out, leaves them in the car long enough to go back into the house, bring the other kid and walk that other kid out and put in the car. Maybe, I guess, doesn't make much sense. So, yeah, the takeaway I have from that entire interview, and it is a lengthy interview. They talk about a lot of stuff. They butter him up quite a bit in order to get him to elicit more information. They break about 2.5 some odd hours into it. It's a 4-hour and 40-minute recording, so just under 5 hours. About 2.5 hours in, I think it's something like that. They break for lunch. They come back for a second round to ask him more in-depth and more direct questions. At no time during the course of the recording do you ever get a sense that Chris Watts is being forthright completely about what happened that night. Now, he says at length that the reason he pled guilty to all the crimes rather than drag it out or fight against the charges of killing his children, because if you'll recall, his initial claim when he finally confessed was that, yes, he killed his wife, but it was only because she killed his children first. That he told her he wanted to separate, that he wanted a divorce, and in some kind of vengeful rage, she decided to strangle her own 2 children to death. And in a rage of reaction, he killed her in revenge or in rage or something, which is completely counteracted or countermanded, I should say, by the coroner's report. Thank you, Chicago Mike. Scribe, I agree with you. I believe he killed his wife, then the kids prior to leaving their home. Very sad. Like I say, it's not impossible that the kids were alive as he drove away from the house. I just think it's improbable. But at the same time, I'm not quite sure why he would make up that story, because it is far more horrific a notion. It does not look good on him. And if anything else that we've seen so far of Chris Watts' behavior, he has done everything to try to preserve something of his image to others. That's his main concern. Of course, how that image is presented has been degraded by degrees again and again over the course of this, from, a husband who's missing his wife to, well, now he just killed his wife because she killed their kids, to now, well, I might have killed my wife and my kids, but, I wasn't planning on it. I don't understand what I did. I didn't understand. I was freaking out. He says that a lot over the course of the interview about what his mind, or where his mind was at after the acts and in the intervening days between killing his family and confessing, is that he didn't know what to do. He was completely freaked out and everything else. Except if you watch the body cam video, if you watch his behavior, if you watch those news interviews, if you watch his polygraph and the FBI interview the day before the polygraph. None of this points to anything other than his fervent attempts to cover up his culpability. You know, this wasn't some. He showed no emotion. He showed no, like even if you could say, well, he put on a show for the cameras in the interviews where the emotions over what he had done broke through and were mistaken as fear or panic by a caring father and husband, but were actually him breaking down over the enormity of what he had done. Not even that is present. In the news interviews, he is straight-faced and calm and collected. His eye contact with the interviewers never wavers. And you can see, and there's been a couple of videos that have done body language analysis of him, you can see him smiling in places, grinning at spots where he's talking about the possibility of his family being in danger. Even in the body cam interview footage of the police officer talking to him that very first day, just some maybe less or around 12 hours since he murdered his family, he's acting calm. He's acting collected. He's smiling. There's no indication to me that he hadn't planned this ahead of time. Somehow, I guess he seems to think that if he can pass off the chain of events as something that was impulsive, a crime of passion, something he didn't plan on, that it was just a, spur of the moment thing, that somehow that lessens his, I don't know, monstrosity. But he still cannot square that with then killing his children. Okay. He kills his wife in a crime of passion, right? They have an argument. He claims that near the end of this argument, the thing that actually triggered him to kill her was after it was revealed, or at least suspected strongly that he was having an affair, that she said something to the effect of, "You'll never see your kids again." And that she said this to him in the course of their heated argument, during which he was straddling her chest. And this threat of never seeing his kids again was what sent him over the edge to strangle her. Well, here's my question. Okay. If the threat of never seeing your kids again is what drove you into an insane frenzy where you didn't understand how much time was passing, you didn't really understand what you were doing, you were shocked at what you had done in the aftermath, if the thought of losing your kids was the great threat, why would you then go and kill your children? Makes zero sense. Absolutely zero sense. If his major concern was his relationship, his connection, his access to his children, regardless of what went on with his wife, why would you smother them? Why would you take away their lives? Why would you subtract them from the equation of your life, regardless of what you had done to your wife? It makes no sense. Absolutely no sense. Oh, well, Scribe, he was insane, you see. It was all done out of insanity. No, sorry. That doesn't make any sense either. He kills his wife, then he methodically loads his living children by his own tail into the car, drives them an hour off to a work site that he already made sure he would be the only one at, unloads his wife's body, buries her in a shallow grave, smothers his two children, and then one by one walks each body. If you look at the aerial photos of where the children were dumped in those oil tanks, there's a platform you have to climb up a staircase to, and then there are these individual long, tall staircases you have to climb up to the top of the tank to get to the access port. The access port, which is 8 inches across in diameter, and which, by the coroner's information, he had to shove his children's bodies into in order to get them into the tank. There were scratches on the kids' legs and buttocks that show he had to shove them into the into the tanks, one by one. No, no. This is, whatever details he might have relayed in this interview that may enhance the idea or at least the story of what happened that day. He's still not being honest. He's not somehow now unleashed the gates of his honesty, of his credibility. As he said in the interview, his reading the Bible cover to cover has not somehow created a now remorseful soul seeking redemption. No. Even at this late date, even after everything else, he is still trying to put a shine on the turd that he is. So, at length, that is my impression of the interview. I'm going to go to the chat for a couple of minutes here, see what you guys have to say. Let's see. Chadwick Dupree says, how could they go eat after listening to that? Well, these are experienced law enforcement personnel, FBI agents, CBI agents. God knows what they have had to look at, what they have had to live with knowing, what they've had to discover over the course of their careers. You build up a tolerance to it to a certain extent, I assume, a gallows humor about it just in order to get along with your day. So, like I say, I don't begrudge anything that the investigators or interviewers said or did in the course of that interview to try to butter him up to give details and information. Just like in the confession videotape, if you watch, they are the ones who suggest to him that Shanann killed the kids. Because at that point in the interview, they don't really care what he has to say so long as he tells them where the bodies are. Because once they find the bodies, they can do forensic tests and they can square that with the evidence at hand to find out what really happened. So them lying to him or playing nice or anything else, that's a tactic, and I can, not being a crime scene official myself or an investigator or detective on such things, I can only imagine what they have to go through to just get through their regular days, knowing the things that they know and seeing the things that they've seen. So let's see. Vortex says, saying the kids were alive during the drive undermines the impulse story, in my opinion. Exactly. Yeah, that wasn't an impulse. The hour some odd time between driving from the house to the dump site. Yeah, that's not an impulsive act. That's not a crime of passion. If that part of the story is true, and for the sake of argument, I'll stipulate to it, that doesn't show impulse. That doesn't show crime of passion. That shows absolute callousness, depraved indifference to human life of your own children. That you're going to carry them out there along with the dead body of their mother and then smother them before dumping them while they're sitting right next to each other. As the story goes, he smothered the youngest one, Celeste, and then smothered the older one, Bella, and Bella fought back because there was evidence on her body and she bit her tongue and bit into the top of her mouth as she was struggling against her father. It's horrific. Let's see. Chadwick Dupree says, could have been an afterthought knowing that they would tell. Maybe, I suppose, but given his relationship with Nicole Kessinger, and that's another aspect of this whole story. What was her involvement? What was the mistress's involvement in this? I have a hard time believing that she was physically present or involved in the murders. I have a hard time believing that one. Do I believe that she had a greater role in inspiring him and or encouraging him to do something about his kids? Not necessarily murder, but maybe being a bit more selfish about his time that might have encouraged him towards this. I think that's probably true. We already know that she's lied to investigators because during the course of her interview, she said that prior to starting to talk to Chris Watts in June of 2018, I think something like that, she'd never heard his wife's name. except by her internet logs that the police have since retrieved. She was searching the name Shanann Watts as early as September of 2017. So 9 months before purportedly their relationship began. So I don't know if there's more than one Shanann Watts in the world that, of all people, Nicole Kessinger would be looking up on Google 9 months prior to her starting in a relationship with Chris Watts. But yeah, her testimony to the cops has been full of lies. She's not a reliable witness. What involvement, encouragement, Lady Macbeth role she served in this story, hard to tell. And Chris Watts' recitation of her words and actions and everything else sound kind of credible, but again, it's hard to tell. Random American says, well, I didn't know what this stream would be about when I clicked on it, and now kind of depressed. Yeah, well, like I said, the title, I hope, was to be a forewarning. Morbid Fascination. Atomic Squid, I think he sounds like someone exhibiting psychopathic traits or at least some form of sociopathy. Well, the best analysis I've seen so far is on a channel called Live Abuse Free. And she talks about the psychology behind narcissists, and especially narcissists that are also psychopaths. Which is things. These things can be mutually exclusive. You can be a narcissist and not a psychopath, or a psychopath and not a narcissist, or you can be a combination thereof. It's possible. Her analysis is the most interesting and calm and clinical that I've seen so far on the subject, based on the information she had available at the time. I'm curious to find out if she does a follow-up video of her own on this interview to see if it either confirms or denies some of her own theories on things. Izub says, the amount of time it takes to smother someone shows it wasn't impulse. He had 3 to 7 minutes to think about what he was doing to each of those kids, and he kept going. Yes. Every moment he applied his hands to their mouth or throat or everything else was a decision point. You know, this wasn't like you pulled out a gun and pulled the trigger, you know, and a split second movement of the hand can be equated to maybe an impulse, you know, a reflex, crime of passion. No, in 3 separate incidents, 3 different times, he strangled or smothered the life out of 3 different individuals. This was not impulse. This was systematic slaughter. And the idea that he hadn't pre-planned this, that his intentions prior to that night weren't already established in his mind or clear, I think is pretty much bullshit. Let's see. Diane Cormier, if I'm saying that correctly. I don't mean to put the lilt at the end, but there you go. He wants her to come visit. Well, he did say in the course of the interview that he hoped Nicole Kessinger would talk to him at least once, but she never has. You know, I can't imagine why he thinks she would ever want to talk to him again, all things considered, and given the lengths she's gone to separate herself from this situation. But yeah, I'm not going to say that Chris Watts is insane, but he's certainly not mentally all there. Let's see. Vortex says, that seems like an uncommon name for her to be searching. Exactly. I mean, if it was like Jane Smith or something, he couldn't draw a line. But as unique a name as Shanann Watts would be, given her place of employment, given Chris Watts also being an employee there, there's no way she didn't have an interest in Chris Watts in some capacity prior to the start of their relationship, or at least the timeline that they've given so far. So Nicole Kessinger has been lying to authorities in some way. Whether she's been lying insofar as being actually involved in the crimes, I have a hard time believing that she was like there when they happened, or that she gave direct instructions to Chris Watts, like, you need to get rid of your family or something. But I am completely willing to believe that she encouraged him in so many words that she didn't want to have kids around, and or he needed to do something about whatever, and that she could thus be implicated in, I don't know, maybe not aiding and abetting, but sort of like as a co-conspirator or something to that effect. Beth Castleman says, from what you've said about the kid's death, it feels like premeditated murder in my mind. Yeah, I don't have any doubt in my mind that he didn't plan this out, both before and his actions after the crimes were done entirely to try to conceal what he had done. So yeah. Now, it's a moot point legally because he's already pled guilty. And he's gone away for 5 life terms, so he's not going anywhere. But at this point, given his ego and everything else, there's only so many avenues he has to try to salvage whatever image in his own mind or in the minds of others that he can, I guess. I'm not a psychologist. Don't take my word for it. Let's see. Genti Max says, like said Scribe, have you ever watched the Green Mile John Coffey interviews? No. I've watched the Green Mile, the movie. I don't know about the John Coffey interviews. I'd have to look at that. Yeah, so I guess that's all I have to say. If you're curious about the case, there's plenty of documentation out there about it. Some of the best breakdown videos I've seen on the case and the footage involved, I would take a look at Jim Can't Swim, the channel Jim Can't Swim. He's got a series of videos on the Chris Watts case that are very good at analyzing the events and things around it. Derek Van Shake has done a series of videos on body language in regards to Chris Watts's TV interviews and the police camera footage and the confessions and such. That's also very good. There's a couple of if you just type in Chris Watts documentary, there's a couple out there that are somewhere in the neighborhood of an hour plus long that do a good job of it. But yeah, that's about it. So guys, thank you for joining me for this little rant recitation. I hope I don't get inspired to do another one of these for a separate case, because I can't tell you just how horrific the details of this entire thing are. I mean, I don't think I need to tell you. Any rational human being is just appalled by this. But why focus on this more than anything else? Like I said in the last stream, I can't recall another case where from the very moment the investigation began, everything was documented. That's what makes this so interesting, not only on an individual level as the case, but also as a look into the procedures of solving such a case. You know, the actions of the police, the actions of the investigators, the actions of the interviewers, the polygraph technicians, and so on. You know, you could follow this case step by step through the videos as, sorry for the repetition, a case study in how a missing persons and or murder investigation goes. So on that score, it's just very informative, beyond just being completely fascinating to me as a person who's interested in true crime and things like that. So anyway, guys, again, thank you so much for joining me. Hope you found this interesting. Link to the full audio is below. And if you're interested in this case, you've got plenty of material to look at. Hope everyone has a good day, and I hope to see most, if not all of you, on Lords of the Night tonight on Satsu's channel. So take care and bye.